We've got Joey from JOLA, Chris Frederick from a political perspective, and yours truly, me, Peyton from Fourth Radical. So we have a lot to talk about, obviously. This morning we heard the sad news, perhaps not too surprising, although earlier we had heard some reports suggesting that this would not be the case, that Mitt Romney will be voting to confirm, or at least he is in support of the process, to confirm a Supreme Court judge before the election. So Mitt Romney, along with Cory Gardner, means that there will not be enough Republican crossover in order for Democrats to stop this by normal means. There's going to have to be some kind of nuclear level effort in order to stop it. How you guys feeling?
Yeah, I guess it's not too surprising. I mean, when was the last time we saw a real Republican dissent that was meaningful? McCain, maybe, back in the day. But since then, we hear Collins talk, always kind of wavering. And then if they need the votes, she ends up, going with the Republicans. Sometimes Mitch McConnell gives her, okay, we don't really need your vote. You can back out of this. But, it's a coordinated effort. And I think there's incentives on that side to play ball. And so it's not super surprising that Romney did this.
Yeah, I mean, this is the thing about it is, like, there was reason to think at the get-go. I had seen early reports suggesting that Mitt Romney was basically saying, no, I'm not going to be voting for this. But at the same time, it doesn't seem too surprising considering Mitt Romney's background. He is more of that traditional conservatives, and where Donald Trump has been strong specifically has been in the areas where traditional conservative values or traditional Republican values allow him to be strong. In many respects, Donald Trump's story actually has been that of a weak president, right? The only things he's been able to do are the things that typical Republicans are able to do, or things which advantage them, whether it's packing the courts or the tax cuts, or things in which Donald Trump has unilateral power, which is, sort of areas of foreign affairs, right? And so for Donald Trump now to, be able to get someone like Mitt Romney on board with the Supreme Court, maybe it's not all that surprising. I think that a lot of resistance libs were maybe surprised or shocked, thinking that Mitt Romney was on their side now. But I think that was obviously just sort of a gross miscalculation.
Yeah, 100%. And when you talk about Romney and the vote he made before against Trump with the impeachment, I mean, there's no way he makes that vote if it actually matters. Just like Susan Collins right now. The only reason she said that she would not appoint a justice or confirm a justice before the election is because it doesn't matter. It wouldn't have affected anything. Not only was she pressured by by the moderate Democrats in her home state with her upcoming election, in which, by the way, she is doing terribly in. I think the latest polls had her down by 5, 6, 7 points. But I think people need to understand that when a politician does something all the time, it's to further their political interests. Just because Mitt Romney decides to do one thing, like say Black Lives Matter, remember back in the day, a couple months ago, he said Black Lives Matter at a protest. Just because he makes one symbolic vote in the impeachment doesn't mean he's on your side. I mean, we should know who he is at this point. And if you fell for it, then that's on you.
Yeah, and I don't know if you guys saw Romney being interviewed when he was talking about this. It came off as super disingenuous because they were asking him some basic questions that were leading to major contradictions. And he just kept going with, well, I'm not going to talk about that. I made my statement and I think it answers all the questions, that kind of stuff. And it just looked like your typical Republican stuff that we're seeing all weekend of, I'm just going to say what I want to say because it suits my purposes right now. And I don't really care if it meets with what I've said in the past.
Yeah, we've definitely seen all kinds of crazy contradictions coming from basically everyone, from all the Republican sides. And it's not at all surprising, I should say. Chris, if you do have a link to that, if you're able to find a link to that, could you send it? That'd be probably something good that we could watch. But yeah, no, I mean, especially Lindsey Graham's. I imagine all of us have at this point seen Lindsey Graham's long-running, all the clips that are playing right now, and now Jamie Harrison is now blasting along on the TV airwaves with his massive fundraising haul, the clips of Lindsey Graham saying, use these words against me, use my words against me. I will say Lindsey Graham's seat is probably vulnerable in a way that it wasn't previously. I mean, we saw polls coming in suggesting that it was 50-50 or that it was really, really close, but the 50-50 poll, guys, was kind of an outlier. It was probably maybe Lindsey Graham was 3 or 4 points ahead. It was definitely a tighter race than we might have typically expected in a state like South Carolina. But something like this, I do think, is going to be politically damaging to Lindsey Graham. There are moderate voters. I mean, I will say, so the swing voters who Joe Biden have been targeting, the high information moderates, are generally of two stripes. There's the evangelical stripe of high information moderate voters, and then there's the more traditional conservatives who are also sort of traditional conservative moderates who are not necessarily in the evangelical stripe. I do think that the evangelical stripe of the vote will probably be motivated because of this. Because of the Supreme Court issue and concerns over abortion. But then also the high information moderates who are more concerned with process over the concerns over abortion, those are going to be the voters who probably break away and are going to be able to, are going to more so be going over to Joe Biden on the basis of this. I mean, I don't know if you guys saw, but there was a poll coming out showing that, confirming the Supreme Court at this point before the election is, I think it was like 62% opposed, and it was only 29 or maybe 30% in favor of. So it was, I mean, massively underwater trying to push through a Supreme Court appointment this close to the election, especially given the hypocrisy that we all remember from the Republicans. So, this is, I think, this is definitely something that's going to really affect things. I don't know what the early voting situation looks like in you all's respective states of California and Pennsylvania, but I know where I am in Virginia, I had been thinking maybe I'd go early vote on Monday or something, but I was driving by, the sort of county center where I would go to early vote, and the lines are just insane. Even today, I swung by. I wasn't actually planning to early vote. I was going to the grocery store, and I sort of passed it on the way, and the lines were just out the door and all the way back. And I'm like, oh, Jesus, man. Like, I mean, we're the days and days and days now, we're seeing just lines and lines and lines out to early vote. I mean, the energy to early vote right now is something like I have never seen in my life. I don't know if you all have seen the same things.
Is that typical that you have early voting that early, or is that like a special thing for this year?
So usually there is early voting, and you can go and early vote with an excuse. I'm not sure if they changed the rule with it, but in Virginia you can go out and early vote more or less like a couple months out in advance if you have an excuse. Wow. I used to always early vote because I had the college excuse, and then there's always the religious excuse, and then there's other excuses that like don't really require you to like answer anything. So you can basically say, yeah, I'm doing something. Basically, if you're busy, you can just highlight that you're busy. So you can technically you need a reason, but you just say you're busy,
Yeah, Democrats
Right.
definitely want as many early votes as they can get, because I'm not sure if you guys would agree with this, but the first debate is on Tuesday, and it's going to be an event, to say the least. I think the more votes Democrats get in early through voting, through mail-in voting, is the better, because I think Joe Biden might not perform the best against Trump. I know they're both deteriorating mentally, but I think Trump is way better at pushing the issue, and he's a better showsman, which is very important when it comes to the theatrics required in American politics. So I definitely could see why people would be so excited to vote early, especially during this election.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's almost not even a fair race either, because I mean, yeah, Trump definitely has the advantage as far as, he knows how to be an entertainer versus, just Biden trying to give his, political type speeches. Trump knows how to entertain, but also Trump's kind of really held to a different set of standards. I mean, if Biden goes out there and is dishonest in the way that Trump generally is, he's going to get hammered for it so much harder than Trump ever would. So it's almost like they're playing two different games, and it will be, at the very least, it will be entertaining to see what happens.
Well, people expect Donald Trump to be dishonest in a way that if Joe Biden were to, which he has been dishonest many times, in fact, that sunk his previous presidential attempts. I do think that the media would be much more scrutinizing on Joe Biden. It would certainly damage him a lot more than Donald Trump. Although, I don't know. Maybe, I mean, the other possibility, though, is that the response would be like, well, who is more dishonest, Donald Trump or Joe Biden? Like, I suppose some people have argued that because Donald Trump entered the space, it made room for other politicians to also be more dishonest because it just lowered the standards of our political discourse. So, I mean, I suppose you could look at it either way, but yeah, I don't know. I guess I don't know.
Yeah, I think Trump is so good at being dishonest. And Joe Biden, I mean, since the very first Democratic debate, I was thinking, oh no, there's something wrong with him. Like, I made a video that was like a minute long while watching the debate when he first gave his opening statement. I'm like, oh no, Joe Biden is not here. We cannot make the mistake of sleepwalking into this problem. And we did, and we're here now. But there's very complicated issues that will be discussed. Trump is going to lie, lie, and a lie. The question for me is, will Biden be able to effectively refute the lies? Because if he can't refute the lies, then I think there's going to grow a lot of suspicion in the American people of, what Biden's actually there for. And they might give more credibility to Trump, because if Trump is just barreling down with lie after lie after lie, and Biden has no rebuttal, then I feel like that gives a little bit of credibility, false credibility, to Trump. So I think what matters is the quality of who is being dishonest as well.
Well, I think that there's going to be a few main things that are going to be that Donald Trump is really going to try to shift the issue to. One, we know that he's been for the longest time trying to shift the issue of Black Lives Matter to an issue of violence on the streets, concerns with protesters, breaking a few windows and things like that, majority peaceful protesters breaking a few windows. And then also on the other hand, Donald Trump is clearly going to try to shift the Supreme Court debate to a debate over court packing. We're already starting to see some of that. I don't know if you guys saw some of the Senate session today. I was listening to some of the arguments. Specifically, Ted Cruz was already out trying to do this, trying to make this Supreme Court appointment pick a debate over whether or not court packing was acceptable. And so obviously court packing is something that's going to, is a more negative issue in the American public. And so if Donald Trump is successfully able to somehow make the Supreme Court appointment to the replacement of Ruth Bader Ginsburg a debate over court packing, then that's going to be, it'll allow cover for Donald Trump, Republicans, Mitch McConnell, et cetera, to go ahead and do their worst and get someone appointed before the election. I will say this, I had a nightmare last night that Stephen Breyer also passed away and died. I don't know if you guys have ever had those dreams where like you wake up and you're not sure if it was a dream or like this was like a memory. The first thing I did is I went to my phone and Googled and I was like, oh God, thank goodness. But I mean, point being is just how much tension we have right now in our country that I'm dreaming of such a terrifying situation that would, completely melt down our country. Because no doubt, if another justice died, they'd for sure push through. They just do both hearings at the same time. So, it does go, I think, to show like the massive hypocrisy in the Republican Party right now.
Yeah, so would you guys recommend, knowing their hypocrisy, knowing what lengths they're willing to go to, if your opposing side in anything is willing to do anything to get power, if you are not willing to go to those lengths, are you submitting power to that side? Because if we keep on saying, or Democrats keep on saying, we must be principled, we must not cause too much noise, we're not gonna push the envelope on too much radical movements within this, but Republicans will literally do whatever they can to grab power. So as that keeps happening, aren't you essentially surrendering that to the other side? If they are willing to go to whatever lengths, they're willing to cheat, they're willing to do anything, they're willing to change the rules, and you're not able to. I feel like that's a bad place Democrats find themselves stuck in.
Yeah, and that's kind of where we're going with things. Is it seems like the Republicans have this will to win, and yet the Democrats don't always have this will to win. Like, not necessarily willing to push things, like what the Republicans are doing right now, where they're going back on their word, giving up everything that was important to them, or that they said was important. How they justified doing things 4 years ago is what I should say, not what was important to them. Justifying all that they did, and then it just means nothing right now, right? But they'll do that to win, and they do win by doing it, right? And the Democrats, that's my big hope, because I think actually what goes on here is a lot of this could be mitigated if the Democrats if they actually win and they have the determination to be strong and to actually do something. There's a laundry list of things you could do to get power back. But if they just get in there and try to play ball and go, well, we want to be nice and we want to stick to the rules that have been around for hundreds of years and we want to stick to all these norms, they're just going to continue losing every single time. right? Every single time.
Well, my question would be principled relative to what? I suppose that you're juxtaposing principledness with the ability to win. I think it seems to me that you can be principled on abstract principles. You don't have to be principled relative to the status quo. And I think that there are ways to say, for instance, it's more democratic to move forward with adding a few justices to the court and instituting a rotating system. It's more democratic, lower D democratic, to add Puerto Rico and DC as states. It's more democratic to institute these constitutional reforms, which will make the system more fair for more people. I don't think that there's anything unprincipled with these claims or with these statements. It's not cheating, and it's not weird or bizarre at all. Early on in the history of this country, we kept on adding states routinely. It was a very routine thing to do. The founders and framers planned it to be this way. This is a very American thing to do. There's nothing un-American or unprincipled about this. Just because something hasn't happened in your lifetime doesn't mean that it's weird, bizarre, or that it's cheating. And so I think that I agree with you that they need to play hardball, but I would disagree with you that the concept of principledness needs to be contrasted with the possibility of winning or the possibility of playing hardball.
Well, I mean, you can have a mixture of both, right? But this idea that you want to play nice all the time seems to be translating for decades now into losing. I mean, what was the big accomplishment they got from 8 years of Obama, which was medical coverage, and that's being slowly eroded away in the courts. So you have to do, I feel like you have to play tough when you're playing against tough people a little bit, right?
Well, my point being that those are different things. I mean, they're not the same thing. I think you can be principled relative to democratic principles, relative to the value of making sure that everybody has a right to vote. There's nothing unprincipled about playing hardball. If by playing hardball you mean expanding the vote, you mean making the system more fair, you mean giving people access to health care. And honestly, nobody ever said that being a good person was easy, or that doing the right thing was easy. It's always going to be hard. It's hard in your personal life, and it turns out that it's hard in politics too. And sometimes you got to do things that really rock the boat a little bit. So I'm just supposing that I would maybe push back a little bit. You guys want to take a look at some of the clips from Case Study?
Well, and for the record, I'm not necessarily saying be unprincipled, right? I mean, you should be fighting for things. I'm all for the things you talked about, like expanding voting and stuff like that. I'm just saying they got to play hardball, and we're already hearing Schumer and Pelosi sound like maybe they're, not going to do that. But yeah, let's take a look.
Yeah, that's really the big issue, is the people delivering the message, not really the message. I think we could agree on that. We don't have the best messengers in this, but I definitely want to check out these clips.
Sure.
Yeah, you guys want to take a look at, there's one with Tim Kaine. He's my home state senator, so I kind of want to take a look at that one if you guys don't mind. It's from the 21st, so that's yesterday. It's on MSNBC.
Let's see if I can find this one.
Is it Tim Kaine on options? On how many options are on the table to fight or put pressure on Republicans?
Yeah, it's Senator Kaine on pending confirmation battle in the Senate. It's Case Study QB.
Okay.
It's on MSNBC. I'm not sure the name of the person interviewing him, but she has like kind of a blue shirt dress thing on.
Yeah. Okay.
You are on these positions, either a reality here. I want to just ask you where you are on these positions. Ready? Either adding seats to the Supreme Court, maybe eliminating the Senate filibuster, potentially, as has been discussed, statehood, perhaps for D.C. and Puerto Rico. Are any of those options things that you would take off the table besides, as you've already said in this interview, the idea of impeaching either the president or the attorney general?
Hallie, you can ask me hypotheticals, but that doesn't mean I'm focused on them. I'm focused on trying to convince Republicans to keep their word to the American public. I don't want Republicans to try to destroy the Senate as an institution or the Supreme Court as an institution. If they decide to violate their promises and violate their principles and just say, well, the only thing that matters is raw power. If you got the votes, you can do whatever you want. I don't think that's going to work out well for them, and I don't think it's going to work out well for the American public. So I just hope some of them will keep their word.
Yeah, so Tim Kaine here relying on Republicans to keep their word in order to make sure that things go through well and they don't get blown out
Yeah,
of the
this is what
water.
we mean. Keep your
Yeah.
word. Stay principled. That's the Democrat strategy. Is that the public will see that they're such professional managers of the situation. We're just asking Republicans, please be nice to us. Please be nice, and they're hoping that voters will see that and I guess see the Republicans in a negative light. I'm not sure how it'll play for certain demographics, but yeah.
Well, the thing about that, though, is some people really want the Democrats to come out and name like specific things, like we are going to pack the courts if you do this, or we are going to, add Puerto Rico as a state, or something like that. But this is, I think, becoming like a sort of major flashbed because
A reality here.
it's becoming clear that the leadership, at least of the Democratic Party, don't want to either A, they don't want to do those things, or B, they don't want to run out and be seen as advocating these things because they know something like court packing is probably net unpopular with the American public. And so, if they're going to do it, they're going to have to do it quickly and as soon as they have power, as opposed to, making this a vote, like come vote for us if you want court packing because the American public probably wouldn't get behind it. What do you guys think is the angle that the Democrats are going at?
I mean, I guess this video is an example of where I think it's kind of what I was getting at about having a backbone and being able to do something. I mean, and I get their strategy, so it may be like you're kind of alluding to, which is it might not be the time to start pushing that you're going to pack the courts and you're going to do these things. It may be a smart strategy to wait. But it definitely worries me when I hear, people in positions of power talking about, well, if we could just get the Republicans to be honest, if we could just get them to stick to their word, it makes me think we're just going to blow the next 4 years. You're going to get a blue wave and you're going to get nothing with it because you're just going to be hoping the Republican leadership becomes good people. And I think that's what worries me is, what we're hearing from Pelosi, Schumer, and Tim Kaine here that are it's not going to get anything accomplished.
Right. I wish that Tim Kaine would come out very vocally and say, look, these are the things that we're going to do. Because, at the end of the day, the only real leverage that Democrats now have, given that we heard the report coming out that Mitt Romney is at least willing to go forward with the confirmation hearings, is that the Democrats can really only offer threats. Like, look, if you do this, then you're going to get your comeuppance after the election, or something like that. There's not any real things that they can do. I think they can delay the vote like 30 hours. I think they can demand like a week of hearings or something like that. But there's not a whole lot that they can really do. I mean, even Republicans could stop the week of hearings if they decided to go nuclear and break the Senate rules, which allows the Democrats to request a week of hearings. So even that isn't necessarily guaranteed, but they're allowed to do it under the current Senate rules, which again, the Republicans could replace. But maybe they'd be willing to offer a week. And so it's not clear what the Democrats can really do besides offer threats, and we're not hearing threats from the Democrats. Again, though, like I was suggesting and like you were alluding to, it is possible that the strategy here could be to just sort of keep the sword behind your back, not say anything too loudly, and then if we do get power, then we're going to do it, or threaten them behind their back and then not run out to the public, not run out to the media and say these things because they don't want the election to hinge on a debate over court packing, because that's not a 50-50 issue. And even if, and even by the way, if it is a 50-50 issue, which it's not, it's net negative, even if it was a 50-50 issue, it's more unpopular than something like COVID or the confirmation of the justice, which is closer to 60%, about 64 to 65% of the public saying that we should not confirm the justice until after the election. They want the debate around this to be one of those two issues, either Trump's failings on COVID or around the fact that Republicans are trying to cram through a justice when the American people don't want it. Those are the things that the Democrats want the election to be about. They don't want this to be an election about court packing. And so it's hard to exactly tell what their strategy is. I think that that's going to be something for, hearing leaks about, like, what are the Republicans saying that the Democrats are saying, or what are the inside journalists saying that the Democrats are saying, and trying to tease it out from there what the Democrats are really going to do. But I'm going to be honest, I'm not too optimistic. I think that when Dianne Feinstein comes out saying that she opposes some of these things, I think she's being honest. She actually opposes some of these things. That said, I think that there is room to maneuver Democrats, because we saw Joe Manchin also come out saying that he was at least open to the idea, that he didn't strike it down. He didn't say that he was going to do it or say that he was in favor of it, but he didn't strike it down and said that he was open to the idea. So I think that this is a situation where, you have basically the most right-wing Democrat out there, one of the most right-wing Democrat out there, saying that, well, this isn't like a crazy idea for Democrats to go ahead and do. I think that it suggests that there's room for progressives to push the Democratic Party in that direction. Even the most right-wing Democrat recognizes that that's something that they're going to need to do. So I think that this is a situation where progressives need to put pressure on Joe Biden, need to put pressure on the establishment Democrats, including Feinstein. Otherwise, they won't do it. But I think that it does suggest that they are at least open to being pressured, which is different than they might be on some other issues. What do you guys think?
I mean, yeah, it's hard to know at this point what the right strategy is. I mean, I guess they're even the main. I guess what I would like to see is the strategy that they have, if they're strategizing right now, and this is all part of some big strategy, is that it's a strategy to help people over the next 4 years, and not a strategy to make sure that Pelosi and Schumer and Tim Kaine are going to be reelected the next time that they're up, right? If that's what they're concerned about, then we all lose, right? If the strategy is how do we regain power and stop the Republicans in the long run, then we might see something from it. But, if you just look from history, that doesn't tend to be what they strategize about. They, as was mentioned earlier, politicians strategize about their win, their in particular win, and we all are going to lose if that's how this is run.
Yeah, I think a big thing we have to look at is how different issues will play, like you talked about on the debate stage, which issues are most pressing to the American public, and which issues a terrible public speaker like Joe Biden. I mean, he was a decent public speaker, but in his current form, he needs easy topics that he can just use to appeal to emotion. He can't argue these really complex issues with the Supreme Court. I don't want him to talk about the Supreme Court at all. So I feel like getting this issue done with and out of the news cycle going into the election, if the Republicans hurry up and get a justice in literally like 5 days, we might have a new Supreme Court justice in literally less than a week. I think the sooner that conversation ends, the better, because we just hit a huge mark. 200,000 people officially dead in the U.S. from COVID-19, the fourth largest mass casualty incident in American history. I think the numbers were the last 5 major wars we were in combined killed less people. It took 66 9/11s to reach that death toll. And that really got pushed under the radar due to all of the Supreme Court stuff. So I think the Supreme Court needs to be a small news story if the Democrats want to win. COVID needs to be big. And yeah, Donald Trump's leadership needs to be big.
Yeah, I mean, the fact that 200,000 people died should be a much bigger news story. I'm looking right now on the New York Times, and it was a headline. It was a headline number, but you all would remember after 100,000 deaths, they published that massive Sunday editorial that literally the entire front page was covered with the names of people who had died. The entire page. That's not what we saw this time around. This time around, it was just a small little square, and maybe that's just because it's been going on at this point. But I think that it definitely should have been a bigger story. But we're just dealing with a situation where in 2020, so many damn things are happening that it's hard to compartmentalize, or I should say, we are forced to compartmentalize these other issues as opposed to trying to see them together and understand, oh my God, 200,000 people died. Now, I should say Joe Biden's electoral strategy right now is trying to do something like that in response to the Supreme Court. It seems like what Joe Biden's trying to do is link this to an issue over healthcare. So shortly after the election, the Supreme Court is set to hear something on the Affordable Care Act, which actually could strike down the law significantly. And so Joe Biden's trying to leverage that and say, hey, look, do you really want the Republicans to take away your health care in a lame duck session on the basis of the Supreme Court because they managed to push through a judge and a justice? linking the COVID issue and linking the Supreme Court issue and making it into a coherent story. The question is going to be whether or not Joe Biden is really able to prosecute that on the debate stage. And if I'm being honest, I'm skeptical that he's going to be able to do something like that.
Well, yeah, so a couple things about that. So they released the topics today for the first debate, and the Supreme Court is like one of the major ones. So they're going to be talking about it for sure. And I have to think that, especially since the campaigning right now is not as intense as it would be in a normal year because they can't travel as freely and have rallies and stuff like that, I got to think that Biden is just having like pretty big training sessions where they're just sort of training him for this debate and, pretending like he's going against Trump. You would think that he'd be working that out, and hopefully watching these tapes of, AOC has done a really good job coming out and laying out all the reasons that the Supreme Court is so important. And of course, healthcare is a big one, but she goes through and lists a bunch of things that are basically not going to get taken care of, even with the Democratic president, even if you flip the Senate. If you still have this highly conservative Supreme Court, you're still not going to accomplish anything that you want to get accomplished in the next 4 years. And you can sit around and complain about, well, the Supreme Court keeps stopping us, or you can do something about it and make it so that change can actually happen in the next 4 years. And I think there's a case to be made there with a couple cases. I think it's really important he focus on these ideas like AOC's been laying out and hit that. I also think he maybe not at the debate, but I don't think you completely have to shy away with the fact that these institutions are being broken down. I think there are people who that strikes a chord with, that this kind of hypocrisy shouldn't be taking place in our government. But maybe the debate is not the place to make that message.
Yeah, I think it'll definitely be hard to make a kind of nuanced and detailed message, trying to interconnect our problems together. That's something that I think is really difficult for a lot of people to see, a lot of people to understand how different issues come together and become related. And it's something that if Joe Biden was able to accomplish, and I should say it's something that only the best politicians are really able to accomplish. And if it is something that Joe Biden is able to accomplish linking the Supreme Court with the issue of healthcare, linking it with the issue of women's rights and women's protection, linking it with all the other major issues that we're seeing, including Black Lives Matter, including protections. I already said women's right, but in general protections across the board, then Joe Biden would have shown himself to be a truly masterful politician. But I'm being honest with you guys, especially this cycle around, we just have not seen anything to that capacity from him. And so I'm skeptical that he's going to be able to really prosecute that case on the debate stage. That said, we also need to keep in mind the simple fact that Joe Biden is absolutely out fundraising Donald Trump in a massive margin. I mean, we've seen over $100 million flying into Joe Biden's campaign shortly after the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. I think within 48 hours, it was well over 100 million. I think that the Saturday following the death, it was 71 million or something crazy like that. And so, we're talking about a situation where Trump was already going bankrupt. He was pulling ads out of Arizona, pulling ads out of crucial swing states like Ohio, pulling ads out of Michigan. I mean, these are states that he absolutely needs, but he couldn't afford to run those ads. And at the end of the day, most people don't watch the debate. It's only the policy nerds and junkies who already have their mind made up who are the ones watching the debate. The people who haven't made up their minds yet, they're the ones who aren't watching the debate. I mean, that's not true across the board. But generally speaking, the majority of people who are watching and tune in to watch an entire debate have already made up their mind. And so you're talking about a small sliver of the audience who are sitting down and watching the entire debate, who are actually saying, okay, I'm willing to have my mind changed. Now, that said, a lot of people do watch the clips from the debate afterwards. People who, are like, okay, let me research the candidates, let me watch the clips from the debate, and let me see what's going on, right? And so if Joe Biden has a massive campaign edge, he's going to be able to push out those few clips in the debate, which are to his advantage. So I think that when we talk about the debate angle, we also have to talk about the fundraising edge, which Joe Biden has right now, which is, again, absolutely significant. Trump's campaign is going bankrupt. There's talk about Donald Trump needing to pull out of his own pocket in order to pay for his campaign, something that he's resistant to. But before the Ruth Bader Ginsburg thing, there was talk that he was going to need to do that if he didn't want his campaign to go bankrupt. There was already talk that he's actually laid off some staffers in a few key states because he just couldn't afford to be paying everybody, and he was just running out of money. While Joe Biden's campaign was already pumping in record-breaking money. I think in August we saw $364 million flying into Joe Biden's campaign. And again, this month is set to absolutely smash that record and smash previous records through and through. And again, Donald Trump's campaign isn't really seeing massive upticks in fundraising. They're trying to fundraise off of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death, but unfortunately hasn't worked out very well. I'm sure you all saw the report. Chris, we were talking about this earlier, but Joni Ernst sending out a fundraising ad, fundraising off the fact that Ruth Bader Ginsburg passed away, and that did not play well in the media, and she got a lot of negative. Right, she got a lot of negative feedback from that, a lot of criticism from that, and that did not play well at all for them. And so it's much more difficult, I suppose, to fundraise off of the death if you're the opposition party.
I think. You go.
Oh, my bad. Okay. One thing I always wonder about, because like you mentioned, undecided voters. It just blows my mind at this point that there are still undecided voters. I mean, it just seems like this is one of those cases where it should be so cut and dry. Whatever side you're on, it seems like you would make a pick.
So this is a little bit, I think, of lack of clarity in speaking. So generally, when we're talking about undecided voters this late, especially into a highly polarized election, we're probably talking about voters who aren't necessarily tuned into politics. So that's a very different kind of demographic. Like the people who are tuned into politics have generally already decided, right? But it's voters who are less tuned into politics who are undecided. But there's a nuance there, because there's undecided voters and then there's non-voters or unlikely voters. And so there's a kind of overlap there that's going on right now, which is to say that, yes, there are undecided voters, but it's also not clear where those voters are, whether or not those voters are even going to show up. Because if you haven't made up your mind at this point, you're less likely to go out and vote, right? I mean, high information voters are the voters who are most likely to go out and vote. I mean, this is probably the most tested prediction in all of political science.
I think it's really important to look at our age of communications and how that plays into it. You made a good point with people watching the debates. They're not going to watch anything for a 3-hour format or whatever. But when it comes to what matters in politics today, as sad as it is, clips matter. So Joe Biden needs to make sure that he has at least 1 or 2 marketable moments that he can clip out and advertise, and make sure he does not forget who he is. Like we all saw, did you see the Nancy Pelosi
oh God,
where she literally just didn't know where she
forgot where she was or something?
Biden cannot have that issue, because low information voters will be swung by that issue. And another thing we have to worry about when it comes to election day, states that don't have good mail-in voting, and even if a state like Pennsylvania, we just had the state's court ruled that ballots can arrive 3 days after the election and still count, which is great. But definitely in high populated areas like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, there's going to be a lot of people still voting in person. So we have to worry about the poll workers being there that are necessary. I'm actually working with an organization right now that recruits like poll workers and make sure that we have everything functioning properly. It's how long are the lines going to be? If the lines are long, once voters get there, are they going to be properly registered? There's a lot of bars to entry, so that's going to be a big deal, because if you look at the Pennsylvania map, very middle of Pennsylvania, red. There's going to be little segments of blue in Pittsburgh and Philadelphia, and those 2 places are going to carry the state. So access matters, and understanding this new media landscape matters.
Yeah, and that's going to be, I think, really, really tricky given the whole COVID situation right now. I mean, in general, campaigns have had to really sort of be on their feet and really try to figure out things. Oh, lovely. We have someone here, someone writing in, reporting this stream to the DOJ. Bye. Oh, lovely. Yeah, we are the Antifa brainstorming, or what did I name it? That brainstorm? No, planning session. That's what we're called. So thank you for reporting us to the Department of Justice.
Yeah, we'll talk to Bill Barr soon.
Yeah, Bill Barr will be prosecuted. I totally lost my train of thought. I wanted to show you guys the clip of Nancy Pelosi doing that thing you were just mentioning earlier. You guys want to watch that? That was clipped on Case Study QB as well. I'm still laughing at that comment. That is the greatest comment, I think. Second greatest comment I've ever gotten on chat.
Which one is it Pelosi doing?
It's the one where Pelosi just, I don't know what happened to her. If her brain.
Oh,
that was so weird. Even people who like love and support Nancy Pelosi are like, what the hell did she do? I mean, this one was just weird. You guys have it. I guess there's two of them. So the one that I pulled up is 51 seconds.
Yeah.
There's a 25-second one, and there's a 33-second one. I have the 51-second one because it gives more context. You guys ready?
Yeah.
Okay, I'm hitting play.
10 states, as I said, on Friday, started their early voting the day that we lost Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
But to be clear, you're not taking any arrows out of your quiver. You're not ruling anything out.
Good morning. Sunday morning. We have a responsibility. We take an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That is 100% cringe. Oh my god. It's sad, honestly.
Yeah.
Oh. Did I have the wrong one? I must have grabbed the wrong clip there.
I'm watching the 51-second one.
That's what I did. She doesn't say it.
Yeah, she didn't say it in that one.
Search up Nancy Pelosi brain glitch. It'll come right up.
I think it's this one.
Yeah, it's 25 seconds long.
Oh, it's the 25-second one that has it?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, my bad. That was my fault. Sorry. Let's see.
It's right below it on the Case Study QB.
Yeah, I think I found it.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, we definitely. I can't find the brain glitch one.
Yeah, Nancy Pelosi brain glitch. You could probably type that in.
Or good morning, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, good morning,
well,
she says.
Well, we've probably all seen it. The weird, super crazy brain glitch.
Yeah.
Yeah. But no, I mean, it definitely is not something that inspires confidence, right? Like, you know, love or hate Nancy Pelosi, she's still one of the major leaders of the opposition to the Republican Party. So you'd like her to be a little, you know, at least quick on her feet and not doing weird things like good morning, Sunday morning.
Well, remember, she is third in line to the presidency, right? So if Joe Biden wins and he goes down, then she becomes, well, Kamala, not Kamala, I always mess her name up, but Kamala will be president, and then Nancy Pelosi will be VP. The power ticket, the neoliberal power ticket. I can't wait.
Yeah. I mean, it is, I think, startling. That said, I think that it does mean that Nancy Pelosi, and I think we've seen reasons for this in the past anyway, this is probably Nancy Pelosi's last time running for re-election. There's a lot of reports suggesting that she is planning to retire shortly after, you know, this will be basically her last time, which I think suggests that Shahid Buttar will, I mean, if he runs again, will probably be able to pick it up and win because he'll have that name recognition at this point. I mean, he actually did quite well in the initial stage of the primary. California is a little bit different than all the other states, but they have some kind of jungled system, and they basically, I think Shahid got over 10% of the vote in the first section, which warranted a runoff between the two. So he actually has pretty decent name recognition. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if Shahid ran again, not facing Nancy Pelosi after Nancy Pelosi retired. I think that he would have a very decent shot at being able to pick it up and win, even if he isn't able to win this time. Which I'm not saying that he doesn't have a shot this time, but I mean it's definitely an uphill battle for sure.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens. I mean, it looks like there's a movement here where we're starting to see more and more progressive individuals coming into office. So that would, good to see Shahid, if he was, or someone like him, able to take that position. I think we're going to see a lot more of that in the, between now, 2 years from now, 4 years from now. I think there's a lot more interest in like the Movement for People's Party and stuff like that to get progressives into these smaller seats, not just necessarily focusing on the presidency, but smaller positions. And I think that's going to help move that party, right? If you see, like right now, it's easy. You talk about the squad; it's just a few rebels or whatever. But when all of a sudden there's a lot of them. And not just like, a lot of people that are in that progressive caucus, it's arguable how progressive they are. But once you have real progressives in there, I think that, it's harder to stand against those
and
individuals.
It's quite clear, I should say it's quite clear, like, who the fighting progressives are. Like, I mean, you see a lot of name coverage of them, that they're working together, and the squad is clearly growing. We've seen it grow this time, these past elections. They haven't gone in yet. But we've seen a number of wins, right? So I think that we're in a situation where it's going to be, there'll be like there'll be a real progressive caucus. There'll be a real progressive caucus, hopefully, in the coming years, and things will hopefully start to change. But change is always slow, unfortunately, and it's one of those things where certain things like climate change, we need it to happen fast, and unfortunately, it's not. But hopefully we can start seeing a little bit quicker change.
Well, this is why it's important for progressives not to totally curse out everyone in the Democratic Party, because you're gonna need people to see you in good faith when you decide to. I mean, when Pelosi leaves, when more and more people are being replaced at the lower level, at the state level, at the at the congressional level. More and more corporate Democrats are being replaced by progressives. We're not going to win these lower elections by saying I don't like liberals, because if you look at Bernie's support even in this primary, he got around 35% of the vote. I think around 15 to 20% of that vote came from people who identified as moderates, but just understood that his policies were right for the future. So even if they don't believe in a full socialist revolution or a big upheaval of capitalism, even if we move to a system that's more of a social democracy or more of a market socialism society, if we have a system like that, that's a great first step to achieve a lot of these goals. But we're not going to do that if we keep on saying like, oh, these stupid libs, like we need them and able to defeat, when we want to take that step, take those leaps to do something like solve climate change.
You're saying that we need the libs in order to defeat the fascists?
No, we're gonna do it all by ourselves. We have a solid 5% of the country. We could take on the entire Republican Party, Democratic Party, everyone. 5% versus all, dude.
Well, they say liberals always bleed fascist. I mean, what do you think? I genuinely mean this. Like, we didn't really talk about this last time. I don't know if you want to have this conversation, but I'm kind of curious, like, how you feel about liberals. Like, do you think that they would just break fascist if the left started actually making genuine wins? Or
No, I don't think they would go fascist. What do you mean, liberals in the sense of people who are literally center right politically, or do you mean people who identify as liberal within the American political system?
Liberals, as in someone who wants more so centrist, like kind of they have a sense of mixture of capital and integration with government or government intervention into the market, general consensus on protection of property rights without much modification.
The big thing I hear when it comes to the view of Bernie Sanders is, yeah, I like him. I just don't think it's realistic. And I don't think he can win. I don't think this is a winning mentality over here. You hear a lot of attacks to the progressive movement from people like Pete Buttigieg that we have too many like purity tests, and it's true we have been a movement that's been more about subtraction than addition. And I think we need to invite more people in, even if they don't completely agree with us. If they only think, like I saw Andrew Yang get a lot of pushback for his Medicare for All plan, for example. His plan was like the Australian plan, so it's like everyone gets Medicare as it is right now, which is covering, I think, 80% of everything, and then everyone buys into a supplemental system if they want to. So it's a two-tiered healthcare system. Bernie wanted a one-tier healthcare system, and we could, you could debate that later. But if there's someone that still agrees universal healthcare is right, I don't care which form they want to adopt. I care that they are on my side on that issue, and we can have these battles later. But for right now, we need to fight as a movement with people who are Yang Gang, with people who want to, with even some libertarians, some more left libertarians. We need to be able to band together with these groups of people. And your main question was about libs, though, right?
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that the questions are integrated, right? But like, I'm just kind of curious, like, how you feel about like working with people who like are completely like, it's not like they agree with you; they do disagree with you, or at least they, especially when it comes to socialism or things like that. I know that you're not like a straight socialist, but like, how do you? I guess like how do you form coalitions with someone who I guess disagrees with you outside of the political chambers, right? Like, I mean, your example right there is interesting because you're saying that you want to work with people who disagree with you on the issue of healthcare. And like, I would agree with you in the political chambers, like in Congress, you have delegates who all believe in one thing, and then they come together, hammer out a law, and then once that's or hammer out a bill, and then once that's a bill, then we start debate, then progressives, even people who disagree with the details of the bill, are like, well, this is certainly better than nothing, let's push for it. But what about before the negotiations start? How does that work?
We talked about this a little bit, how it's difficult because we don't live in a government that forms, different parties form coalitions. It is the two-party structure, and the only way to get anything done is to use one of those two parties as a vehicle for change. It's for the Tea Party movement to rise up in the Republican Party until populism completely took over and they ended up having a fascist win. Although we all know fascism is much easier to achieve because it works with corporate interest, so they will always allow that. Social democracy, it's hard to get. It's always been hard to get historically. But when you're talking about when you're on the left, if there is a better option, not a good option, but if there's a better option and an objectively bad option, and we devote all of our time to fight for the perfect option, but everyone on the right is going to fight for the bad option together, then just by nature, that bad option is going to win. Does that make sense at all? So like if the people...
Well, why don't coalitions exist on the right in the same way that they exist on the left? I mean, that's like, why?
That's an interesting question to ask, considering ideological boundaries, because I think the right is more about social conservatism, isn't it? They don't really care about fiscal stuff as much. Like, I don't hear much about fiscal policy other than I want lower taxes. They don't care much about, like... It's harder when you're looking at intersectional views of society on the left versus the Republican ideology, I think, is pretty straightforward. So the need for coalitions isn't that prominent. Like, what would you say the right-wing version of Bernie Sanders would be? Because I feel like Donald Trump was kind of like a natural progression from the failures of Romney, from the failures of McCain.
The thing about it is you're actually like really right about that, which is that the left is always much more coalitional than the conservative movements, even throughout history, not just peculiarly to the United States. And I don't know enough about this to be able to speak like really authoritatively, but I know that there's like a deep distinction, both in the case in Germany before World War II, and also in Italy, and clearly in the United States, like a deep distinction between sort of nationalist movements and then the kind of church movements, right? And it always seemed like the nationalism movements arose out of a kind of response to secularism, integrating into the church. It was like, the church is leaving, and so we need to have some kind of other traditional institution which can maintain us, and that's going to, it turns out, be the state. And so then, hence you sort of had the birth of fascism. Now, I don't know that that's going to play out directly in the United States, but it does seem that there is. The coalitions are definitely different on the right. Like I haven't studied this, so I don't really know enough about it. But it definitely does seem like there just seems to be a general sense that, like, well, we're interested in authority, we're interested in maintaining the system, we're interested in maintaining what's going on, and property, something about hierarchy. But then always on the left, there is a sense that, like, it's much more coalitional. It seems like there's a sense that, like, well, we should go beyond what's happening right now, but nobody agrees how exactly to do that.
Mm-hmm. So just one historical example, and then I want to give it to Chris a little bit to talk what he feels about the subject. So you brought up Germany a little bit before World War II. One of the big issues that allowed right-wing ideologies to take over, and ultimately fascism, is that the people on the left, like the communists, would not be willing to work with the people in the center. So, like, the liberals were not to the left enough for them. So they said, we're not going to help you in their version of whatever electoral politics was at the time. I'm not an expert on the electoral system of Germany in the 1930s. But just like right now, the Greens are unwilling to work at all with Democrats. The communists back then were unwilling to work at all with the regular mainstream liberals. So that let the right all coalesce together because they didn't care. I mean, they had one ideology, and that one ideology was to turn back history, turn back time, reject secularism, and band together under that ideology.
It was also, though, the case that, like, fascism was much newer at the time, and they were making many anti-corporate arguments. They were arguing, especially like in Italy, which I think is different than the Nazi case, but they were arguing that we needed to break up monopolies we needed to strengthen workers' rights, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, they were communists.
And so initially there were a lot of people on the left who were allying with Mussolini, and then, of course, it turned out that when unions started, standing up against corporations, which Mussolini had then thought were associated with the state because he had strengthened these corporations and they were making money or what have you, then he went to break the unions, and that's when the left realized that they're not actually our allies. And then as soon as that happened, then the left started getting persecuted under Mussolini.
It's like what we talked about with Rising. Remember we had that conversation about how Rising actually leads you down a more right-wing rabbit hole because, like you said, Mussolini he was a communist. He ran on that platform, and there was a revolutionary tone amongst the populace, and he was really going down there, and he was a hungry, power-hungry person. He wanted to be a dictator, and he saw a path through fascism, and that's when he coined that term. That's when he wrote the Doctrine of Fascism. But the upper class, the bourgeoisie of that society, decided they saw there was going to be a revolution, so they decided they would rather have a right-wing revolution other than have a worker-oriented revolution. So that's why a lot of could-be socialist revolutions end up falling to the right, because the people who control the society end up moving the needle to a point where when things topple, it topples to the right, because as we know, capitalism and fascism facilitate each other. So just moving on, I want to hear Chris's take on it.
Yeah, Chris, how do you feel about this?
Yeah, so I mean, there was a lot going on there, so I'll just sort of pick up a point and go after it. But I think it's in some ways healthy that we have these differences on the left, but these sort of groups of people. And I think it's certainly okay in-house to sort of attack the libs and point out flaws there, because otherwise it's kind of too easy for a lot of people in this country to just go, well, there's only two choices, and if I don't like the Republican, I guess I have to go with this sort of Biden, Hillary Clinton approach, and thinking, well, that's the other side. So it's nice to be able to have it pointed out and go, oh, there actually is a difference behind this. And I think it's actually a strength of the Democratic Party to show that there is actually a variety of thought in the Democratic Party, right? You've got your sort of mainstream centrists that are, you know, like the Democrats, and then you've got your people to the left, your social democrats, you know, people who are even further to the left. There's sort of a variety of ideas up there that are in there. I mean, in the Republican Party, how many real ideas are there? Like, what do you hear? I mean, the number one thing you hear is this hatred of Democrats, or this hatred of the left, and sort of coalescing around that. I mean, look at all these T-shirts you see at these rallies and stuff that are really just about attacking the Democrats. So I think there's, in some sense, there's a healthiness to it that, you know, maybe not completely trying to destroy the libs and put them down, but sort of having a debate there. But certainly, yeah, if you're going to try to make changes, you have to sort of get along a little bit. You have to have some kind of a group that can function together that, like you say, is more than the 5% or whatever, you know.
Off what you just said, I think the number one best way to go for people on the left this election would be to beat Biden up as much as they could. Make him, I mean, he's already such a bad candidate, but do whatever you can to say they are bad, they are corrupt, but also do your best to get him into office at the same time. As a weak neoliberal, still point out the flaws. I don't agree with people who are like, yeah, don't insult Biden at all. Don't talk about him until I don't agree with that at all. I definitely agree with you on that point. I think it's a smart strategy to say, like, okay, Biden terrible, but I'm still gonna do what I can to get him to win. And that's what the issue was in Germany. It wasn't exactly they couldn't talk at all about issues. It was when it came to when it came to electoralism and actually working within institutions and the government, they were unwilling to do something like that. They said they didn't
believe in the institutions themselves, and so as a result, they weren't willing to use those institutions to fight the immediate threat of fascism. And on the left, I mean, the thing about it, though, is it is a vulnerability for the left because, I mean, we've seen it numerous times where the right will come and pick off some coalition. My favorite example is the way in which Republicans, especially Frank Luntz, was able to peel off the support of the LGBT movement when it came to the death tax. So Frank Luntz came around and he was basically like, well, look, because gay people can't get married, you are basically, when it comes to the estate tax, you don't get any kind of benefits. First of all, you don't get the benefits of marriage, but then when someone passes away, you get essentially double taxed. And so they were like, well, this is a really big problem, and this becomes a gay rights issue. And so suddenly Democratic politicians had the LGBT movements in their local districts and communities calling in saying that you need to vote for repealing the estate tax or voting for limiting taxes in that way, when, of course, the issue was never had anything to do with the estate tax. It had to do with the injustice of gay rights and gay marriage being illegal. And so it is a situation where it's much easier always to peel off a group by not talking about the interconnectedness of the problems, right? They're deeply interconnected always. And I think, again, I mean, we were mentioning earlier how great politicians are the ones that are able to integrate the problems and see how all the problems are deeply interconnected with one another. And I think that that's the kind of thing which allows the left to be able to come together, that kind of storyteller, someone who's able to tell the story of how your problems are actually my problems, and they all come together, right? Like being able to explain how actually it looks like we're a coalition, but really we're one group, because it's not always apparent to people. It's not always apparent how our ideas and how everything kind of interconnects with one another, how the problems intersect with capital or the problems intersect with issues in parliament, that these things come together. And I should say, when we talk about these institutional reforms right now, that a lot of Democrats are starting to bring up when it comes to adding states, when it comes to packing the courts, when it comes to instituting a rotating system, it is because a number of Democrats are starting to come to the conclusion that our problems are linked. The reason why we're not able to make advancements in protections for Black lives, where it regards police officers shooting Black people, it's because of the fact that our institutions are rigged, that our institutions don't allow advancement of the serious kinds of reforms that we need in order to advance change in this country. And it really is my view that if we can't come to that kind of consciousness, if we can't come to that kind of, I don't know that it's always class consciousness, but a kind of general consciousness of how our views are, or excuse me, how all of our problems are interconnected and intersect with one another, then we will be picked apart. Then we will be divided, and the Republicans and the right will be able to stop us. It is, I think, a really difficult thing to do when you're constantly told that, you have your group, and then that's what you do. You don't really try to think about how your problems relate to other people's problems. And it is a problem, I think, maybe with individualistic culture, but it's something that we're going to need to overcome if we want to have any kind of real substantial change. Chris, do you have something to add? You kind of nailed it there. I mean, I agree. There's going to have to be, in order to achieve something, there's going to have to be people coming together and working together and coalescing, like you said. And I think you kind of nailed it. Yeah. So do you guys want to take a look at some of Chuck Schumer, AOC? It's on Case Study QB. These clips have been going around for the past couple of days, but I think they're pretty good. There's a few ones, so I don't want to do the thing that we did last time where we all clicked on a different clip, but it was from MSNBC. Case Study QB posted it yesterday. So it looks like you guys want to watch the 2-minute 19 one. It looks like it's one of two. So there's two clips.
What's it called again?
So there's MSNBC, AOC's remarks at a joint event with Chuck Schumer.
Oh, right.
So it's the first one is 2-minute 19, and then the one below it that's connected should be 1:15.
Yeah.
As a product of James Gold's that we are today.
Yeah, and this is kind of what I was referring to earlier, where she kind of just nails it, in my opinion, at least.
Yeah. So I'm hitting play on the one that's 2 minutes and 19 seconds.
Today to make sure that we honor the legacy of Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who came right here and as a product of James Madison High School and as a proud New Yorker and Brooklynite. And it's extraordinarily important that we understand the stakes of this vacancy. Our reproductive rights are on the line. Our labor rights are on the line. Our right to health care is on the line. Labor and union protections are on the line. Our climate is on the line. With an early appointment, all of our rights, the rights that so many people died for, voting rights, reproductive rights, healthcare rights, all of those rights are at risk with this appointment. And so we need to make sure that we mobilize on an unprecedented scale to ensure that this vacancy is reserved for the next president. And we must use every tool at our disposal, from everyday people, especially in swing states. And we need everyday people to call on senators, to call on folks on the bubble, to call Republican senators to make sure that they hold this vacancy open. And we must also commit to using every procedural tool available to us to ensure that we buy ourselves the time necessary. We must commit to allowing and to considering and to utilizing every single procedural tool available to us, again, to buy that time. We need to make sure that we realize and fight this fight with the weight of every person who sacrificed for voting rights. Every person who sacrificed their well-being and their lives to make sure that they could marry whomever they love, to make sure that
I just finished the first clip.
Oh, okay. I thought we were watching the shorter one. So I think you guys must have watched the longer one. Then that's where she goes off on that laundry list. I think that's the one where she goes off on that laundry list of all the reasons that the Supreme Court, and she lays it out. I mean, that's that kind of approach that I think would be decent for Biden to take, where this is what's on the line.
He just can't do it though. That's the issue. Like
hopefully he can bring at least some of the issues together. And I do wish that Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, Chuck Schumer would say all issues, that all the mechanisms, all the options are on the table. Actually, Chuck Schumer did say that specifically. I actually have that clip. It's also on Case Study QB. I was trying to think of the exact quote that he used. He did say all options are on the table. Let's see if Chuck Schumer gives us any more encouragement than Nancy Pelosi did. I'm going to hit play on that one.
Win the majority, God willing, everything is on the table.
Senator, just to follow up on that, at this time, would you consider abolishing the filibuster?
As I said, we first have to win the majority, because if we don't win the majority, these questions are all moot. But if we win the majority, everything is on the table.
Oh, you're sure. Here we go.
All ideas to buy time. Would you be in support of potentially renewing talks of an impeachment hearing, either against the Attorney General or the President?
Well, I think I believe that certainly there has been an enormous amount of law breaking in the Trump administration. I believe that Attorney General Barr is unfit for office, and that he has pursued potentially law-breaking behavior. That being said, these are procedures that are and decisions that are largely up to House Democratic leadership. But I believe that also we must consider again all of the tools available to our disposal, and that all of these options should be entertained and on the table.
Congresswoman, this is in Spanish for Telemundo. Mencionó que es tan importante.
Yeah, so I don't know if you guys finished. Chris, did you finish watching that one?
I think we got through the main part where he talks about everything being on the table. Oops.
Yeah, so I mean, I think that's encouraging. It's certainly much more encouraging than what Nancy Pelosi said, saying that all of our arrows are in our quiver, and good morning, happy Sunday. Definitely, certainly much more encouraging there from Chuck Schumer. And to have AOC also by his side definitely makes Chuck Schumer look a lot stronger, which is, definitely something that you're not supposed to think, given, the guy's like the Senate Minority Leader. He's the leader of the Democrats in the Senate. AOC is one House representative, but somehow having AOC next to him makes him look a lot more powerful, makes him look a lot better.
That's good for the future.
It is, I think, an optimistic thing to see. It's certainly optimistic that AOC has that kind of gravitas around her, and that, reporters didn't feel shy when Chuck Schumer was talking to then switch over and ask Congresswoman and just start speaking to AOC, right? After, Chuck Schumer was the one speaking. I think that does show that, the power that AOC does wield. Now, obviously, there's people who have been criticizing her, but look how effective she has been at leveraging her power in the institution, given how, she has one district out of how many House seats and how many Senate seats, right? I think that it does go to show you AOC's power in some way, not just Chuck Schumer's there.
And Schumer did take a small step today. It was certainly not like a major thing he did, but he did invoke, I forget what it's called, in the Senate today, which is going to limit the ability to have committee and subcommittee meetings. It basically limits the times at which they can take place. I think essentially trying to slow down the Senate a little bit. And of course, he was immediately attacked over that, even though it's essentially what the Republicans have already been doing to run the Senate. So but he called it out and said, okay, we're gonna follow this rule then that's in place. We're gonna make sure that's in place. They told, he was accused, I think Cruz maybe accused him of having a tantrum about it. But at least it's these kinds of things that a lot of times they go, well, we have to be too civil. We can't do these kinds of things. So at least they're making some kind of movement when they can to try to move things in the right direction.
Yeah, well, we should clarify though. One criticism which you could make of what Schumer was saying there was he was saying after the election. So if you give us the majority, then all of the options are on the table. Well, what are you doing to stop this nomination now? What kind of procedures are you going to be implementing now? But then again, still not turning down the possibility of court packing and removing the filibuster. Certainly much better than what we've seen from other people, because I do think that, like, at the end of the day, that's really all the Democrats have, threats, which is to say, if you do this now, then it's gonna, you're gonna get your comeuppance next time around once we take back the majority. I'm not sure exactly what the Democrats could do besides an impeachment, right? I honestly think that that's probably the only thing that Democrats can do to slow it down, and even that might not work entirely.
Yeah, that'd be bad for them. For the media cycle purposes we spoke about earlier, impeachment would be the worst. I mean, we saw how the first impeachment goes. I know it wouldn't be the same thing, but this would be the worst PR stunt for the Democrats of all time, I think, before an election. Do you think they're purposely trying to let it fizzle out?
What fizzle out?
Do you think they're purposely not standing up right now to stop it because they want the story to be done with quickly?
Which story? I'm confused.
The Supreme Court story, like we were talking about earlier. They don't. Democrats don't want that to be the topic. They want it to be COVID and all that.
Well, yeah, of course they definitely want it to be COVID, and they're trying to pivot. But I don't think that there's any way that they can. I mean, the Republicans are going to push forward with this hearing, and they're going to be doing hearings. So I mean, there's nothing that they can really do in order to make it not a story. I mean, obviously they didn't want to be in this situation, but now that they're in this situation, I don't know that there's a ton that they can really do. So I don't know about that.
And I think part of it, I mean, they do keep bringing up the election, and I guess it kind of makes sense. You got to remind people to get out there and vote instead of saying, oh, we're going to take care of it on our end. So it's like you almost have to keep reminding people, yes, I'll do my part as a citizen. I'll do the voting and, and then whatever else people are doing along the way. And then it's kind of like you have to take both prongs of this attack here. You got to have the people voting and remind them to vote. And then also, these politicians are going to have to hopefully have some teeth and stand up after the election or before the election, whenever this happens, and do something.
Yeah, which is going to be, I think, really tough to try to get everybody on board, especially right after the election when you just get people in. But that's going to be the only time that they're going to be able to do it, because all the politicians are going to want to come in and do the thing, or that they're going to try to do the thing that they were elected to do, propose some bill that they said that they were going to do. That's what they all do. So then they can go back to their district and say, look, the first thing I did in Congress was this thing, and you know that you want this other thing, and so that's what I tried to do. Now it got blocked, and that's the typical stunt and run of things. But what they're going to have to be able to do is get on board with immediately moving to add Supreme Court seats and instituting some kind of rotating system so they can sell it back to their constituents at home. And if they're not willing to do that, if they wait a year, especially if they wait 2 years, well, then they're going to get absolutely wiped out when in a Republican wave in the midterm cycle. So I'm worried that they're not going to be able to do any kind of leverage, especially when you have Dianne Feinstein and you have other people coming out already saying that we're against it.
Mm-hmm. By the way, I found another clip then for whenever you guys want to go to that. We could look at whenever you guys want to.
On where?
It's on Case Study QB. They posted it 8 minutes ago. I think it's an interesting topic we could talk about quick. Okay. It's about the Bernie thing.
Yeah, I have it. Yeah.
All right, great.
Want to watch it right now?
The red jacket.
Yeah. All right. I'm hitting play.
Democrats, even Joe Biden's former primary rivals, step up and go public with their efforts to ensure that Trump doesn't steal this election. Senator Bernie Sanders tells the New York Times ahead of a speech he plans to give this week that we're at a dangerous moment for the country and that he plans to mount an aggressive campaign against Donald Trump's efforts. Quote, Mr. Sanders said he would spend the next 6 weeks urging the country to prepare for a nightmare scenario in which Mr. Trump declares himself the winner of the election and refuses to step down, even if he loses. And adding to that urgency, Michael Bloomberg, Democrats, even Joe Biden's former.
I mean, that's a really big deal, and I'm really excited to see Bernie Sanders coming out and leading this effort, coming out and fighting for the protection of our democracy and fighting for our protection in general. I mean, it's one of those things, though, where I'm not exactly sure what Bernie Sanders can do alone, but hopefully he can get some people behind him to join the fight with him.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, he has a lot of people who support him and still wish that he had been the person to win the nomination. So I think his voice definitely will carry weight, especially with a lot of people, that are more progressive like him, that aren't so certain about following Biden. I think that kind of voice could activate some people. I mean, say what you want about Bernie Sanders. I know a lot of people on the right are terrified of him, but he garnered a lot of people together, and he filled venues to get people who wanted to come out and hear what he had to say.
So I'm gonna sort of give you guys my view on what's gonna happen for this election, but I want your reactions to it. Right. So I do think election night he's gonna do what Pete Buttigieg did at Iowa, because all of these mail-in votes are 100% not going to be counted on November 3rd. They're not going to be counted until probably a week or 2 weeks after. This is going to be a situation that makes the 2000 election look like a walk in the park, because we had we had a neocon and a neo-liberal before. Now we have a fascist and a neoliberal, a guy who will say anything that he feels is going to help him get and maintain power. I think Donald Trump will declare victory on Election Day. He probably will be in the lead due to mail-in votes not being there. He will declare he's been setting this up for a while. And then in weeks later, he's going to say, I already declared victory. These mail-in votes are fake. This is all fake. This has all been rigged. This is fraud. 2 million dead people voted 3 times, and all their whole families did too. We had 25 million illegal immigrants come in to vote. I know that's hyperbolic, but he's gonna say whatever he needs to manipulate the American public into a state where a large chunk is gonna think no matter what happens, he won. So I want to know how you guys think it's gonna play out.
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. There's no way he doesn't declare victory on election night. Everything he's doing right now is setting the stage for exactly that to occur, right? All this talk about how mail-in ballots are fraudulent and how most of the country, or a lot of it, is voting with mail-in ballots. That's exactly what he's setting the stage for. So you already hear people on that side of the aisle saying that it's already going to be rigged. I mean, let's remember, when he won, he said the election was rigged. Right, he won the election, and he still came out and said, "No, it was super rigged against me." Of course, he's going to do it when now, when he could potentially lose. He's absolutely going to do it, and that side of the aisle is already all primed to think that it was fraudulent. And I think there's going to be a fair number of people on the left who think it's fraudulent if Trump wins. They're going to go, well, what was going on? Was someone interfering? Was there election interference? Did they actually get into voting machines this time? And I think it's going to be hard. And I think the other thing we're going to see is an unbelievable number of lawsuits at the federal level, at state level, over voting. And, should this set of ballots be counted? And why was this held up at the post office? And why didn't this get in here? And I think it's going to be a mess. And we've already seen both sides. I mean, the Republicans always have think tanks with an army of lawyers going, but Biden has his own team of lawyers who are preparing for all of this kind of stuff, to be prepared for that onslaught of lawsuits that we are absolutely going to see. It's going to be a mess. We think that 2000 was a mess with the one lawsuit, or the Supreme Court having to settle things. This is just going to be crazy, and it's not going to go well if it's being settled by a Supreme Court that, by the way, just had Trump put some brand new person on there, which is highly, highly contentious.
Right. That's what I'm particularly worried about. You get someone new on the court, and you have a massive majority lean conservative court. Let's not forget that last time around in 2000, that we had a number of conservatives essentially flipping on their values, as opposed to allowing the state who wanted to continue voting. That basically the federal government just said, no, you can't. Screw states' rights. Stop voting. Stop counting the votes. Right. Stop the recounts, even though Florida wanted to. And so I am worried that we could end up in a situation where, because of an added justice to the Supreme Court, the election could go a very bad way for a lot of people. And I think the thing, though, is that at the end of the day, it is going to be kind of difficult for Trump to come out and claim victory overall, because we are talking about a number of states, oftentimes Democratic states, who are going to be the ones who are certifying the election for their state. And so at the end of the day, I would like to imagine that our institutions could hold up, and that things aren't just going to completely collapse under the onslaught of litigation. But it is quite possible that the Supreme Court could strike down or overrule a number of states' efforts to thoroughly count their votes, similar to what happened in 2000. And what I worry the most about is that they could use the 2000 election, the 2001, is it 2000? I think it was 2000, not 2001, but it was the 2001 presidency, the 2000 election Supreme Court decision as precedent in order to do exactly that. And that's what I think, very worried about, because once you have that precedent set, then it's much easier to justify legal decisions which say, okay, hold on, we've been counting votes now for 2 weeks. This is too contentious. Just stop.
Yeah, a lot of what I'm worried about is what's going to happen outside of the political process, outside of our institutions. What's going to happen on the ground? We're already at a period of ultimate social unrest, and the top media machine in the country, Fox News, I forget what the ratings are, but millions and millions and millions of people see Tucker Carlson, who is now, I believe, the most popular media figure in the 2000s. I believe he's the most popular media figure when it comes to this. At all
in the 21st century?
I think he's getting to that point. If he's not there yet, he's on a trajectory to get there as a result of Trump and right-wing populism on the rise. They're hearing him every single day, literally. If you've seen him lately,
he's completely unhinged.
There's one protester outside of McConnell's house. There were I would say 30 to 50 protesters outside his house yelling, "Vote him out." And Carlson used this to say, these are the people that are going to come down and burn your communities. These are the Antifa warriors that are going to kill American values and topple Western civilization. And he's so good at manipulating people. And now I'm hearing his talking points reiterated, because I live in a really conservative town. His talking points are reiterated by literally everybody. So what is the possibility that on election night, or within this entire process, the presidency doesn't end until January? And that's scary too. What if Trump loses and he's still president for 2 months? But is there a chance for a sort of not a people's coup, but something of the sort, where Trump is like, you guys need to come and defend your democracy right now, or everything is going to topple. Come to the White House and make sure they do not steal me, because if they steal me, if they make me lose the election, guess what happens next? They are going to come for you. Do you think there's any chance? Do you think the level is at that point?
I'm less worried about that. We've seen a lot of officers and military guys, honestly, a lot of insubordination, if we're keeping it real, from Donald Trump. I mean, we saw the military leaders after the gassing of peaceful protesters in Lafayette Square, a number of military leaders, I can't remember their names, coming out basically saying this was wrong, we shouldn't have done this, and withdrawing troops against the advice and order of the President of the United States. I mean, you could argue that that's the greatest act of, quote, insubordination since the Korean War. When it comes to the military disobeying the direct orders of a sitting president. And so I think that this is not a situation where the president actually has the kind of power that a lot of people are making him out to be. There's a lot of people out there who might support him, a lot of crazy people. But at the end of the day, if the election results come in and Donald Trump is out, I don't think that Donald Trump has the military.
I don't know if I'm as confident about it as you are. I don't. A while back there, I was trying to look up the name for it, and I can't remember. But there was this group of individuals who got together and essentially played out a war game type situation of if Donald Trump didn't leave. And this wasn't just like, just people who don't know what they're talking about. This was like lifelong military people that were high up officials, people who worked in the different branches of government for careers. And they tried to sit down and simulate what are the different scenarios under which Trump just decides he's not leaving office, and then what are the checks and the balances. And when they got into the things like, well, what are the generals going to do? It all of a sudden became a little bit more confused about what are the actual actions that people would do to spring into place, right? So what their final conclusion was it's actually much more plausible than people could think that something like this could get pulled off. And I'm not saying he'll do it, or that he would get away with it.
You're absolutely right. Like you're actually completely right. There's a reason why every time our system of government has been tried, except for in the case of the United States, it has collapsed into dictatorship. I think it's been tried 4 times, 3 times it has collapsed. We're the only time where it hasn't. And so, and it's exactly that reason. Our checks and balances don't really exist in the way that our founders envisioned them, because our political parties are very different. They didn't even really imagine political parties. And also people vote very differently than they had imagined. And we don't really balance things the way that they had imagined. So our system of government has so many massive holes in them. You could fly a jumbo jet through them and they collapse very easily. Our institutions are incredibly fragile. Our checks and balances don't really exist. But the thing about that, Chris, is that existed for any and every president. And so it's a problem where our system of government and our institutions rely on the good graces, on the virtues of our citizens. It relies on people just keeping their word. It relies on people just doing what people did in the past. It relies on people not doing power grabs. It relies on people not being polarized, at least on the institutional level. It relies on these things, and it takes these assumptions for granted. But those are not assumptions that we can take for granted anymore. And so we are in a political era. I think, Joey, you're right, where the president does have such a strong backing where, maybe not Donald Trump, but someone, especially if we're a few more years into the cranking of polarization, where a president actually could do this foreseeably, especially if that president had control of the military. My estimation of it is that the president does not have control of the military. We also saw under Mattis multiple the president wanted to bomb places and the generals just said, no, we're not listening to you. And so I don't think that the president has control over the military, at least Donald Trump. But I think that you could imagine a situation where if the president did have control over the military, that would be it.
My question is also, what role do you think these right-wing militias are going to play in this? I know we had this big Rittenhouse situation, but that's only a microcosm of what this could turn out to be. If we literally had how many people are in the largest protest? Like 30, 40,000, 50,000 people in Washington, and we had a resistance of 5,000, 10,000 militiamen who are coming armed, and they're saying, I'm here to protect the property, but they're also going to be brandishing weapons at people. That's my worst case scenario, is Trump calls upon them to serve their duty, the duty that they have been building up inside their heads, wanting to play cop, wanting to play super soldier, wanting to protect their heritage and property. Do you guys think that's realistic? Do you think that could happen? Or if it does happen, do you think it's just going to happen on a really on a smaller level than I'm saying?
It's possible. I mean, Trump has already alluded to in numerous times when he's speaking, he's talked about well, my people have the guns and weird statements like that, where he's kind of edging this kind of thing on. And he's also, he's suggested, and some people, this thing that people always say Trump's joking, he's also suggested people should be showing up to the polls, right, to keep them safe or whatever, and to make sure that things are okay. But essentially, it's this intimidation that's coming in. He really seems to value intimidation. He seems to value power, people showing power, people intimidating. So I wouldn't be surprised if there are statements being made by him that some people would defend, but essentially telling people to do exactly what you're saying. And I hope it doesn't go that direction, because we're already getting to the point where the violence is getting uncomfortable, even though most of the protests, 93% of protests have been peaceful. And like you were talking about Tucker Carlson, people like that always calling them riots rather than protests to kind of get people ramped up about it. And then, we could see people showing up. The gun laws are different in each state, but sort of going up right against those laws about what you can do, taking your guns out in public, intimidating, and hopefully not worse. But I wouldn't be surprised if we do see some nasty stuff come, people on both sides of the aisle, the tensions are rising, and I hope that we don't see any kind of violence, but it won't surprise me when we see that, these things have actually gotten bad.
It's all really irrational too, because if you look at the U.S. crime rate in general, if you look at the year 1990 until now, it literally went up because Ronald Reagan is an asshole, and then it went crashing down, and the crime rate has been going down in the U.S. consistently for 30 years. It's been going down at a pretty high rate. And anyone talking about law and order being an issue simply is exaggerating it. And this is a fascist skill. They say all these liberals are weak and stupid, but they are also going to destroy this country. That's what they did with the Jews in Germany. These are subhuman people who are stealing from us, and they're not even as smart as us, but somehow they're going to be the ones that topple our country. That's 100% part of the fascist ideology. And when you're talking about right-wing militias, it's really unpredictable. And I do think Trump would be that guy to say, all right, it's now or never. Come by. Like, his ego is so out of control. No matter what happens as a result, he will push for that. And there was another example I was thinking of. I lost it, though, so someone else could talk for a little bit as I think about that.
Well, I think the militias may be a little bit dispersed. I don't know that they would be like concentrated. They're all going to come down on the Capitol. I mean, if you have that in every single city, it's certainly a problem. But I don't know that they would be concentrated in any way to really be able to mount an armed revolution. Maybe in 20 or 30 years as polarization continues to increase. But I think for now, since Trump doesn't have the military, it's pretty unlikely. And, the other thing, though, is when we're talking about crime rates, it's a situation where Donald Trump, where right now, Bill Barr declared Portland, Seattle, and New York City as like anarchist hubs. First of all, yeah. Oh my God. Oh my God. This is straight. We're talking about Nazi Germany, and we're talking about that. This is direct playbook right here. This is, absurd. And it is true that New York has seen a bit of a crime bump over the past year relative to 2019 and 2020 comparative. However, obviously, we're talking about a pandemic where people are hungry, where people are having a hard time making ends meet. Yeah, you bring the economy to a place where people are in trouble and the crime goes up. The response to crime is not law and order. If by law and order you mean sending boots on the ground, sending police on the ground, putting cops to patrol the streets, the solution to law and order is to redistribute the wealth and make sure that everybody has everything they need in order to survive, in order to make it by, in order even to flourish, and then the crime rates go down. So the crime rate is not a situation where you just suddenly have bad people that just suddenly pop into existence out of the ether. No, crime is created. Crime is created by institutions which alienate and disenfranchise individuals. And if you're not willing to talk about those things, then all your talk about law and order is completely irrelevant. And that's, I think, why fascists are so. And I don't want to use the F word too much here, but it's ultimately why these people are so dangerous to democracy. It's because they're not actually interested in fixing the real problem. Even if you told them and explained to them all the findings of sociology over the past 100 years, they wouldn't care, right? It's really about suppressing certain minority groups and certain minority voices, and it's about playing power politics. It's about the idea that power is everything, that power is politics.
Yeah, I do. Using the fascist word, I do agree, because a lot of people who might fit under that umbrella have no idea what they're doing, what their tendencies are. They're just listening to a type of media, consuming it, and this media, it plays on their fears. It plays on all of these human emotions that they simply can't control. So I do agree using fascism too much isn't a good thing. Like, I'm hearing fascism from the right. I'm hearing fascism from the left.
Yeah,
that literally means everything now.
They're calling Joe Biden a fascist because apparently...
Well, people on the left do that.
And a socialist. They call him everything, right?
They call him a socialist and a fascist, and you always hear those people on the right who say that fascism is a far left ideology and weird things like that. And it's just like,
yeah,
dude, like literally, the first sentence of the Wikipedia article tells you that it's not true.
But that thing I was thinking about earlier. Did you guys see the interview with Trump and the one fake judge from Fox, Jean Pirro or something like that?
No.
I forgot her name.
I didn't see that.
That might be completely wrong. It might be a butchering of that name. But she asked him a question about what's happening in the country. And he says, well, you're going to see an uprising like never before, or you're going to see retaliation like never before. Retribution is necessary. There's a lot of amazing people in this country, and they do not like what they see. Something big is going to happen. And she said, what do you mean? The camera goes to him, and they cut it off. Whatever he said after that was so crazy, or he just didn't have anything to say. But I'm just going to assume he said something really, really bad after that. After they said, what does retribution mean? And the clip cut off. I can't find this clip anywhere. On TV, they cut it off. On YouTube, they cut it off. I don't know what Trump said after that. But I think that's really scary rhetoric. And it's really just something we have to pay attention to.
Using the word, I don't think that retribution is ever something that we should cultivate in people. I think that that's it's always a bad idea. Forgiveness is certainly the greatest thing that we've ever learned as a species. Learning to forgive one another and not play tit for tat. It's the highest lesson. And I do think that trying to play into these games of retribution, trying to play into these games of tit for tat, trying to play into these games of, well, they got us, so we're going to get them back, is always going to lead you down a dark hole. And I'm really worried about the rhetoric of Donald Trump. I'm really worried that he is exacerbating these kinds of tensions.
When he used that same word retribution, it must have been last week sometime, when he was talking about the protester who was shot by police. And he was saying, yeah, you have to control that. There has to be retribution. So he wasn't just saying we have to control things. He's saying you have to hit back. You have to have retribution. And it's like, well, no, we have a rule of law. You're supposed to arrest people if they've done something wrong. They get a trial. We go through a whole process. You don't just get to do this stuff in the streets. I mean, that does sound kind of fashion,
it's a vision.
Right?
It's a vision of society that's non-therapeutic. It's an attempt to develop a society that's like, well, we're just going to cater to the worst instincts of humanity. We're not actually trying to build a society or a system that works the best for the most people. We're trying to, make sure that we can maintain our power or something of the sort. I mean, that's sort of, I should say, where I get off. Like when I just, I get off the train when people start talking about things like that. Because look, you can disagree all you want about the policies, but as long as we're in general agreement that we're trying to make things better, we can have a conversation. But if to you politics just means, well, they got what came to them, they did a bad thing, so we're going to do a bad thing back to them. It's like, on my view, I don't even think they're talking about politics at this point. They're just talking about what they want to do, and they're externalizing themselves to the state. I want to do this, so the state should do it. I don't even think that they're actually engaged in a political conversation at that point.
Oh, no, yeah. One of the goals of fascism is literally to ignore everything that's real. That's why the Republican Party this year doesn't have a platform at all. They literally just said, that the party is going to sponsor Donald Trump's 2020 goals. They aren't talking about policy. They're focusing on American exceptionalism. They're focusing on a patriotic education. Like, this is some real stuff. And this, I see an argument. I have both of your chats up in Chris's chat. People were arguing what fascism is or something like that. And this is textbook, like any historical example will tell you this, of right-wing ideology, right-wing revolutionary ideology. This is fascism. It is what it is. Fascism isn't just, the corporate interests folding in with the private government. It's a lot more, or public government, whatever. But yeah.
Yeah, and you have to, back to I think a lot of it is like the emotion that you guys we were talking about earlier, where it's about getting that emotion going and then kind of connecting that to the idea of these militias. It's like militias are usually about fighting against the government, right? Like protecting against the government. So what can change people around to the point where they're all of a sudden fighting for the government, or they think in some way they're protecting the government? It's emotion that gets them there, right? It's not reason and logic that get us there. It's this kind of rhetoric about retribution and scaring people. They're going to come take your stuff, and they're, that's what's going to get people riled up and get these militias moving. Yeah.
Yeah, I am really worried about the tendency, which a lot of people have, to authoritarianism or to some kind of, just immediately bootlicking, honestly. I think that's, look, the right has started to meme the way that the left, uses the term bootlicker. But honestly, like, there just are people out there who, no matter what you show them, will say that the police officer was in the right. I don't know if you guys saw the thing that came out, was it this weekend maybe, where there was an African-American man who was literally just in his home, and I guess his neighbors called the police on him, and so the police showed up and arrested him in his own home, literally doing nothing. He was just walking around in his house, and the police were called, and he had I think a gun pointed at him, and he was handcuffed until everything was sorted out in his own home. And not just that, and that's, you could say that, okay, well, that was one fluke example across the country. But here's where it gets crazy. There are people out there defending this. saying, well, the police officers didn't know, or, you know, using all kinds of these rationalizations or justifications. And you know, and look, you can, and here's the thing about those rationalizations in the case of like, they didn't know. Yeah, they didn't know. But then the question immediately turns to, what are you going to do, or what things are you interested in enacting to make sure that that doesn't happen again in the future? And it's crickets. It's completely silent, right? That's the part. Like, look, I understand that mistakes happen. That's the thing. Like, I understand that. I'm willing to admit that police officers make mistakes, oftentimes murder. But at the end of the day, you should take that and then say, okay, that means we have to change things to make sure that these kinds of mistakes don't happen again in the future. And there's a whole segment of people who aren't even willing to engage in that conversation. And that's where I'm sort of just like, I mean, what do you want? Like, what, you know, people turn around to defend the cops and then they're mad at the left for criticizing the cops. It's like, well, you're not actually engaged in an honest conversation about how you can make things better, how you can stop this from happening again in the future. You know, you can agree or disagree about a particular police shooting, but like, what are you trying to do to make sure that police don't shoot again, regardless of whether or not the police officer was justified in this or that particular shooting? I genuinely get annoyed when, you know, I'll read in the comment section or read in chat, people talking about the details or nuances of a particular police shooting and saying how the police officer was justified. It's just like, dude, like, what do you, like, who can, like, what are you trying to do to make sure that this never happens again, justified or not? And it ends up being a rationalization, like it ends up being a rationalization to make sure that you don't have to change the system if it's the case that the officer was justified. Well, I don't want people getting shot by cops.
Yeah. Most people, it seems like, take a lot of time to change their ideas. So in the short term, when an idea makes them uncomfortable, I mean, they kind of fight for it a little bit. It's like that emotion we talked about earlier. And yeah, you hear weird arguments getting made about police shootings where, you know, they'll say, oh, well, this person had a history with drugs or something. You know, we've heard all these kind of arguments, and it's like, okay, but does that mean that he should be executed in the streets? Is that like if that's that's like the case you're trying to make, is that he's had some problems in the past, so therefore an execution in the streets is somehow justifiable? And, you know, it's a weird conversation, and I think a lot of it is just people take a long time to change their minds. Many people do, at least.
Well, I think that, like, especially in the case of like police shootings or like defending the state or things like that, like there just really are people out there who, you know, like are good people on everything. But then when it comes to police officers, for whatever reason, that issue is just one where, you know, you talk about even just moderate reforms to policing and they think that you're like attacking individual police officers. Like, you know, like, no, like we need to do things to make sure that people don't get shot. Stop arguing with me about the details of a particular shooting, because whether the cop was guilty or not, I don't want people getting shot by cops. And it seems like just saying that is explosive to a lot of people. And I just genuinely don't understand it. I mean, maybe some of you can explain it to me watching, but I don't understand it.
If we could make that same argument that some people are starting to be able to make, where it's like, okay, I don't agree in this action the military is taking, that doesn't necessarily mean that I don't like military people, right? It's that, like, sort of separating it without attacking the individuals who join the military. You can say, I don't think we should be in this war. I don't think we should be in this military action over here. It's a separation.
Yeah.
Because it seemed like for a long time, someone's like, well, my brother's in the military. It's like, I don't have a problem with your brother. I have a problem with the fact that we're in this country doing this thing over there. And it's kind of I think it's kind of that same idea with police, where it's like, we're not talking about, I mean, I guess maybe it's a little more personal with police, but, you know, it's about restructuring the police itself. Like, the organization is what we're really trying to change.
Yeah, that's why I hate the term ACAB, because I think all it does is strip it down to the individual, and it distracts from the systemic changes. Because if you say that, you're literally saying all cops are bad no matter what. If a cop, you know, cops could just fire. I mean, it could just not get fired. They don't get fired, but a cop could just quit. Or a cop could just leave their profession. Like, it's not that simple.
So the thing with that term is, I think it's like trying to grasp at the institutional level of it. Like, all cops are bad because of the institution of it or something like that. But it's not immediately clear in the labeling of it, that's what they're really trying to grasp at. But that's clearly where we would need to go. But I don't know.
Yeah, the messaging, I just don't. I'm all about optics. I think what you say, you're responsible for how people perceive it, especially when you're trying to get into politics. I want to say 100% responsible, but there are certain things you say, and the way you say it could be interpreted different ways. If you're literally just yelling, defund the police, abolish the police, and ACAB, all cops are bastards, that just doesn't work in a modern political scene where regular people, on average, like the police. Regular black people like the police on average, with every poll, according to every poll. People of every community like the police. And we know, like you said before, the root causes of crime, of not being safe, are the socioeconomic factors. But until we fix those factors, attacking all cops as bad, it doesn't work. Because the whole mental framing that every American has of the way things work is so set in stone in one direction. And if we don't open their minds first to the systemic issues,
the problem is that, like, for instance, when you say things like defund the police or abolish the police, you're talking about building out separate institutions which handle the many different disparate roles which police officers encompass today. Like, police do multiple different types of jobs. They handle traffic. They handle robberies. They handle domestic violence situations. Like, you could reasonably think that these are very different jobs, and that in another society, different institutions would handle those things. But police specifically refers to a single institution which handles all of those different jobs. And so you could talk about abolishing the police and building different institutions to handle each of the different separate roles, so then you can have more refined training, and also just more refined regulations on policing itself, what today we would call policing. And, when you sit down and explain that to people, most people will be open-minded to those kinds of things, as long as you clearly explain it to people. But the problem is that it requires so much kind of like it literally requires you to use a word differently that you've been using your entire life, right? It requires you to have a new definition for the word police, or at least, understand that, like, you maybe didn't have all the nuances of the word police before, right? And that just is, I think, very difficult to communicate in a simple and effective way. It's not an easy message to communicate. And the other thing is, we were talking about libs and sort of retribution earlier, and focusing on the individual crimes of it. I also get a little bit worried sometimes when people come around and they fetishize about police officers getting their justice for shooting people. Do I want police officers to face consequences for murdering people? Yeah, absolutely and obviously. But at the end of the day, that's not going to be the fix to make sure that police officers stop shooting people, right? Like, at the end of the day, you can make sure that every single police officer gets their consequences for what they want, but maybe the institution itself is a bit rotten. I mean, we talk about the domestic abuse statistics all the time for policing. That, what is it? I think it's something insane, like 40% of police officers have been reported as beating their wives, police officer men or something like that. So, I mean, this is insane numbers, and that's just the number of reported. I mean, we're talking about a job that's clearly mentally traumatizing. I mean, I think that room for empathy with not necessarily the individual officers, but room for empathy of the fact that this job is so damn stressful that it's causing these people to come home and beat their wives. I mean, oh my God. I think we should have some room to say, hold on, this job needs to be reformed because it's clearly not fit for humans. I mean, just the simple fact that you have a statistic like that should tell you that the job just is not fit. It's too stressful, too straining for an individual human to just handle. I mean, those numbers, again, just not normal, just a not normal thing. And I don't think that thinking about it as only bad people go in to become police officers, I think that you're just come on, seriously, you think that? And there's a lot of good people who try to go in and become a cop, and then things quickly spiral. The institution is just completely rotten. The kind of things, I mean, imagine the stress. You're sitting around in the beginning of the day, you're sitting around and you're stopping people for rolling over a stop sign, and you have to deal with people arguing all day. Then next thing you know, an hour later, you're handling a domestic abuse call. and then you're handling, people arguing with you in Target or Walmart, and then suddenly there's a gunshots across the county, and you have to drive in your car real fast, and then you get there and the robbery had already passed, but you have your hand on your gun or something like that. I mean, my God, could you imagine the stress in that situation? Yeah. Just a day's work, and then coming home, and then you have to pick things up and make sure that your room's clean and all this other stuff to deal with arguments with just the typical household things. I mean, my God, so I think we should just, for the sake of the police officers, break up the role, abolish policing for that specific task, and give individual, create an individual institution to handle all the different aspects of policing. Because I mean, stopping people at stop signs and traffic control is a very, very, very different job than handling issues of domestic abuse, which is a very, very, very different job than protecting a shopping mall, which, I mean, these are just very different jobs, and it doesn't make sense why one single group is doing all of those different jobs. And it's so stressful to have to switch between all of these different high stress jobs. So, I just think that breaking it up a little bit makes a whole lot of sense for a whole lot of different reasons.
Oh, I agree with you. I just disagree with the messaging. I just want to make that clear.
Yeah, the messaging, it seems like the messaging is problematic because it seems like so many protests or ways of protests are immediately shouted down that it's like, well, what is the right way to protest, right? When people are trying to kneel before football games, that's somehow seen as like unacceptable and a major faux pas and something that isn't allowable. So it's, I can see how it is probably difficult to get that message out in a way that is sort of suitable to people that they find sort of, oh, I can take it in this form, where when you're constantly being told, we don't want you protesting in this way. We don't like this way of doing it. But yeah, I think things like abolish the police and all cops are bad. I think especially if you're like in a nice suburban neighborhood, those cops tend to be fairly popular there because that's where it keeps the police keep those neighborhoods safe. So I don't, talking to those people about all cops are bad might not land with that group of people because, in some neighborhoods, the cops are very popular, because not all neighborhoods are treated the same.
Yeah, that's the big divide. If people approach it in the way Peyton is right now, that is absolutely perfect. That is absolutely the way you want to do it. That's how you want to describe it. But I feel like people are adding abolish the police with ACAB, which is what Chris just pointed out. We can't do that anymore. We have to say every reason that cops have it stressful. We can't say every cop's evil. We can't say every cop should simply quit. We need to look bigger. We are the people who are thinking systemically. We can't fall into the trap of boiling it down to the individual level. We need to be about addition. And I think both of you are 100% correct in what you're saying. I just wish, like, if people like us, if this like stream was able to be seen by thousands of people, I think it would have such a great aspect. It just sucks because, as you guys know, the most chaotic, the most negative figures, the most loud figures are going to be the one that once they get all the views and all that stuff. So that it's just unfortunate.
I will say this one, I don't know if it's necessarily pushback, but maybe an asterisk on what you're saying there, Joey. I do think that the term defund the police, abolish the police, did do a great deal to put the issue of policing on the scene. I think that if there was a much more moderated tone about the messaging, it maybe wouldn't have been quite as explosive as it was this time around, which I think genuinely was helpful to the movement. I mean, now Democrats are in favor of much more aggressive stances on policing because it's become clear that their base is actually quite far on the issue of policing. So I am happy to that extent, but I think that it is very difficult sometimes to maintain a message of like where you stand, because especially in the ages of sort of social media and where we have access to even relatively small voices saying certain things, it's very easy to lump people in, right? Like it's very easy for Donald Trump to run around and lump Joe Biden in with far radical socialists, which clearly he's not by any definition of socialism, and people fall for it. Like, people actually believe it. Even people who are relatively or at least moderately well educated will completely fall for it, and so I think that some of it comes with the media landscape, but I think that I suppose, as negative on the term defund the police as maybe you are. But I do agree with you that it would help if we reframe things towards the concerns of the police officer. Like, I mean, the way I was positing it there is just pointing out, well, man, look, I mean, you got to feel bad for the officer, the individual officer in the situation itself. I mean, my God, can you imagine that stress level? I really do think that that's a much more effective framing than framing it as being antagonistic to the individuals who are in a popular institution, like it or not.
Yeah, like I've noticed to the people that I've explained, because it comes up in chat and stuff like that. When you actually explain what defund the police means, people actually pause and go, "Oh, that actually seems kind of reasonable." Like once they get that explanation, it seems to make a lot more sense. But they just think you mean, almost like this anarchist concept where there's like no one's like running the place, right? It's just sort of a free for all. There's no enforcement arm of the government, which is not really what people are. That's not really what people mean there.
Yeah, and it's so difficult to explain anything. I don't know that there is any clear like tagline which can explain something so complicated. I mean, it requires people to sit down and listen to you for, maybe 20 minutes and like listen to the arguments and sort of make up their mind. And that's just not something that you're going to be able to do with a tagline. They're going to hear defund the police. They're going to hear abolish the police and make up their mind that way. And it's just so difficult to sort of have a nuanced conversation with 300, almost 400 million people at this point. So it's just hard. So are there any other clips you guys wanted to take a look at? There are a few more that got posted on Case Study. Let's see. Oh, Christo posted a video on his channel. You guys want to check that out? I guess Donald Trump is launching an ugly attack ad on Ilhan Omar. You guys want to watch that?
Let's see. How long is it?
It's like 7 minutes.
Let's see. Where's Christo?
Or at least maybe the first clip that he shows before his video. I think it's like 10 seconds.
Yeah, we could definitely check out the clip.
Okay, yeah, let's watch the intro clip to his video. Joey, do you want a link? All right, I'm going to send it through Skype. Yeah, so let's see what this is about. I'm going to hit play.
Going to win the state of Minnesota because of her, they say. She's telling us how to run our country. How did you do where you came from? How is your country doing? They're going to tell, she's going to tell us, she's telling us how to run our country. And you know what?
That was Donald Trump earlier tonight launching an ugly and disturbing attack on Ilhan Omar, a Minnesota congresswoman.
Yes, I don't know if you guys were able to finish watching that. Telling us how to run our country. You know, we just saw Donald Trump the other day talking about genes and genetics and having weird stuff on that. Actually, Chris, I saw that. I think it was on your stream. Were you the one who was talking about that on your stream?
I definitely played that clip on stream. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it was on your stream that I saw it, and I was like, wow, that's very disturbing to be talking about genes and how we have good genes and stuff like that. Very certainly reminiscent of very disturbing times in history. I don't think it's at all an exaggeration to say that he's definitely racistly. This is just racist dog whistling. I mean, this is actually, it's not even really dog whistling. I mean, the guy is clearly just racist. I mean, like, there's not really, I mean, look, if you just saw that clip and that was the only thing you saw of Donald Trump, you just shrug. It's like, whatever. He's talking about our country. He means Republicans. Then you combine that with the stuff he's been talking about, genetics and how we have good genes. Then you combine that with all the other rhetoric that he's been giving us. And it's like, wow, this is truly disturbing. And it goes to show you how racism was always so deeply tied up with the eugenicist movements in the past, and how, you know, these ideologies didn't really die. They died in the form that they existed then, but they're still cropping back up. They still exist, and they're still very popular with large segments of the population. And if we're not careful, we could end